Hello and welcome to Learning to Turn with me, Beau Legouge. Today we'll be covering our fifth and sixth operations on the way to making a bowl. To recap quickly, the first four were to flatten off the end, actually this end, and cut the recess. Then put it onto the chuck and cut it down to the round and then flatten off the other end. So far it's been pretty straightforward. In fact, if you think about it, all but one of the cuts have actually been straight, which has made it pretty easy going so far. I'm pleased, in fact I'd say I'm ecstatic with how well it's gone to this point. But today is where it gets interesting, and by interesting I mean difficult, because this is where we introduce turns or curves. Curves are difficult because you have to do four things in unison. You have to push for distance, you have to swing the handle for the curve, and as you're swinging and pushing, you have to both adjust the angle, vertical angle a bit, and change the rotation or the flute angle a bit. And throughout all of that, I have to maintain the technique of floating the bevel. If I start rubbing the bevel, bad things happen. Basically, when you're hitting the side grain wood, remember this is mixed grain. You have end grain and side grain. And as it comes around to the side grain, if I'm rubbing, it's going to cut in a little bit deeper because it's easier, softer wood. And then it hits the end grain and bounces out, and that creates a bounce wave. Several of Stuart's videos show this dramatically because he's really going out of his way to rub the bevel. And afterwards he runs a pencil over it, and it really just, the bounce wave just pops. He says that everybody he's ever taught rubs the bevel to start with, and it's one of the hardest things to learn is how to float or glide the bevel properly. So I'm expecting I'll be no different. I'll be making that same mistake. But hopefully after 16 or 18 tries, I'll get something of a handle on it and be beyond that initial phase of messing it up every time. So we actually have two cuts today, as I said. The first one is to simply take off the corner here. Need to make room for the tool rest to be repositioned into this space so you're close enough to make the long sweeping curved cut. And then once you have the corner cut, now you can actually start making that cut all the way around here. If I do it right, the final cut will be one long sweeping motion. So let's go over the particulars for these two cuts. The first one is a straight cut across the corner. Stance is a little bit unusual because for a straight cut you normally would have the left foot pointing the direction of the cut, but in this case I'm going to be cutting this direction, which means I need to be standing on that side of the lathe. It is a left foot forward position, but not really aligned with the cut. Hand position will be, for both of these cuts actually, will be with the left hand under the tool, thumb and fingers providing opposing pressure, so that this is the key to gliding the bevel. If I only had my thumb on there, I'd necessarily be pushing into the wood or rubbing the bevel, which is of course the main thing we want to avoid. So fingers need to be wrapped all the way around on top, not just on the back side. They need to be on the top so that they're actually providing downward pressure as well as the thumb. The tool, of course, is a 40/40 bowl gouge. I'm using Papa Bear, the 3/4 inch today. Tool rest will be, for this cut, will start off being parallel to the face. Vertical angle is 5-10 degrees down, and the horizontal position, that's going to depend somewhat on the size of the bowl, mainly the depth of it. But it's going to be somewhere in the 80 to 95 degree range, which yields a cut angle of 45 to 60 degrees. Let's see, the flute angle is 9:30 to 10 o'clock, basically the lower wing, left wing at horizontal, parallel to the floor. And I believe that covers all of the particulars for that one. I'll be making 3 to 4 cuts, hopefully, in order to clear enough wood. I need to be careful not to take so much that it starts to cut into the shape that I want the actual bowl to take. So you have to be a little conservative there and just make sure you're making enough room for the rest to come in at an angle for the next stage. Moving on to the second cut, the main cut of the day, shaping the outside of the bowl. Since this is a curved cut, it's right foot forwards. All curved cuts, right foot forward. I'll be talking more about how you set your stance in a moment when we get to technique. The left-hand position, I already said, is underhand with the thumb and fingers on top, providing pressure down to stabilize the tool, but not pushing into the wood in any way. The tool rest is angled, and that angle will change at least once through the course of the operation as the bowl starts to take shape, and you can bring the tool rest in closer and at more of an angle. Let's see, the vertical angle, this could be difficult because Hi, this is Bo coming to you through the magic of voiceover. I just muted myself in the video because I was about to go on at some length about vertical tool angle, and it turns out that the whole issue that I was discussing at such length was completely misguided. I had somehow gotten the wrong impression of what the correct tool angle is, and so nothing I had to say here was going to do you any good. So we're going to skip the vertical tool angle for now. I'll cover that in the voiceover of the actual turning videos. And we'll just get back to the remaining particulars for shaping the outside of the bowl. Talk to you later. In the horizontal dimension, it's a changing game. As I said, the tool will be swinging throughout the operation. So, my start angle will be a bit beyond 90 to get started into the wood, and then swinging throughout. The flute angle will be between 9:30 and 10 o'clock, starting off closer to 10 and closing to 9 as I come towards the end of the cut around the corner here. Moving on to technique, there's a lot to cover with this curved cut to shape the outside of the bowl, but I'm going to keep it simple because I've been interrupted now by, I think, 4 trains, 2 sirens, 1 helicopter, a dog barking, several loud cars, and a hummingbird that was unusually loud. So we're going to just cover stance right here, and then I'll get to everything else in the voiceover. Stance for this one is, as I said, right foot forward, and you start by setting the position of the tool at the end of the operation, end of the cut. And then you step into that, and then step forward with the right foot to a good starting position. And over the course of the cut, it'll be a weight transfer to the left foot with the tool coming into body contact at the end there. So that's the goal. I've tried this a few times and it feels really awkward, but here's hoping I get the hang of it. And here's hoping I'm able to record the voiceover without so many interruptions. So here we go. This one could be interesting. I expect to take pretty much all of the 18 blanks back there before I feel like I have a handle on this one. Wish me luck. So by my count, we have 3 errors to clean up from the intro. The stance for both of the cuts and the vertical tool angle for the curved cut to shape the outside. And on top of that, obviously, we did not get into much detail on the technique for that curved cut. Let's start here since we're looking at the angled cut to take off the corner of the blank. the stance for this one. And in the intro, you may recall that I said that that should be a left foot forward stance because it's a straight cut. Well, of course, there's another type of stance for straight cuts, and that's parallel. And that's what I should be using here. So my feet should be basically parallel to the angle that I'm cutting, to the direction that I'm cutting. And then the operation is simply a weight transfer right to left with the arms fairly pinned to the body. Sometimes with this one you can't have the arms pinned to the body because the angle is too steep, and you basically have to reach out in order to get the tool in the right position. But the stance should still be parallel to the angle of the cut. And here you can see I'm kind of parallel, but my left foot should be farther back to achieve, well, at this point I'm getting ready to do the curved cut, so my stance is, we're into the other stance that we need to discuss. But when I'm doing that curved cut again in the future, I'll comment on how my feet are not as parallel as they should be. I think that's something I correct farther along, but the first few blanks, I'm not doing it right. Now we're trying to do the curved cut, and you can see I'm having trouble just even getting started. And that's mostly just because I'm new to it, but since we're talking about stance, my stance is all wrong here. The stance should be right foot forward, and it is, but it's not nearly far enough forward, and I'm far too close to the lathe. And on top of that, I'm pretty sure, this isn't something I've gone back and checked in Stuart's videos, but I am pretty sure that I should also be farther to the right in order to give a more comfortable position or angle for my left arm. At the beginning of this cut, my left wrist is cocked at a really awkward angle, and that would be relieved, I guess, if I were 6 or 8 inches farther to the right, rather than being so close to both to the lathe and to the blank. These first few attempts here were a struggle, going slowly, not getting as much of a curve into the cut as I should. The curve is dictated almost entirely by the swing of the tool. You can see that cut is nearly straight. And I did angle the tool as I went, but just not nearly enough. I'm also partly as a result of that, this first blank is going to turn out to be nearly conical as opposed to kind of a rounded bowl shape. We're only going to stay at real speed for one more pass here, and then kick it into high gear, 5x. Actually, we're going to be going 6x for our high-speed sections in this video, because while I'm generally pleased with how well this operation went, I ended up doing 21 blanks, and the net time with all of the fat removed, just trimming it down to actual cutting time, it was, I think, 2 hours and 20 minutes or so. And in order to get this thing down to a reasonable length, still longer than I wanted at nearly 50 minutes, actually a skosh over 50, I ended up going 6x for the high-speed sections. At that point, just then, I stepped away and sharpened the tool. Of course, I cut that out. No point in you standing or watching this spin while I'm off to the left sharpening. But there is a distinct improvement after sharpening. I'm getting some nice shavings here. and the speed of the cut is improved. The main thing I'm going to end up, we'll hopefully see it in the course of the videos, is that I was, in the first few attempts, and even a little bit here, I was holding the flute a little too closed. I don't think I've talked about how the angle of the flute functions as essentially an accelerator for a number of cuts, and the more closed it is, the slower you're going to go. Oftentimes it will yield a cleaner result, less risk of tearing out and so forth, but it's going to go slower, and the more you open the flute, the faster the tool will go. And that's definitely the case. That's something I've really concentrated on in time since filming all of these. I've been doing a lot of bowls just over the last few weeks, and for the angle cut, this initial angle cut in today's episode, I start off with it fairly closed in order to get the tool set and get a bevel without having to worry about the tool skating. But I then open it up pretty wide, and it's not a cut that we're worried about the finish at all, because all that wood is going to be removed. We're just making room for the tool rest. So I can really open it up at the flute, and with a twist of the wrist is all that takes, and get a much faster cut across the corner there. But that's also the case here, and especially at the beginning of the cut, I want to get that flute a little bit more open and get moving faster. For the end of the cut, as I'm bringing it around and just about there, at that point I do need to keep the flute a little more closed. Alright, that's blank number 1 down. Here we are cutting the corner again, and you can see my feet are nearly parallel to the bed of the lathe, and they should be parallel to the angle of the cut. I'm not sure whether that's something that I get corrected by the end of all this. We'll see, I guess. And here we are getting started on the curved cut again, and having trouble with that entry. I started off taking too much of a bite, and then had to move over and start again. Finally, some side view. First blank and a half, side view was no good on it at all. So here you can get a much better view of how big a bite I'm able to take. And I say I was fairly pleased with that aspect of things. Not necessarily on the very first blank, but here we are on the second one, and I'm taking a pretty thick swath of wood off of there fairly easily. There goes Bounder in for a visit. Back in again. You can see here a problem that I had for at least the first few blanks, which is just getting the cut started. From the bottom of the bowl, I had trouble getting the tool angle started in at the angle I wanted, and so as I took a more aggressive angle in order to get started, it would be going in too deep, and then I'd need to correct and bring the angle back out, which basically produces a compound curve, and in turning that's called an ogee. Generally it's much more pronounced than that little dip at the very beginning, and it's a pretty advanced operation to get a good ogee, and I'm far from being prepared to attempt that, but it wasn't really an attempt to do an ogee, it was simply trying to find an angle to get started. So we'll see as I keep going here whether that's something I get a better handle on. The big problem I had through this, learning this operation, was the first couple of inches of each cut, right through there. I was routinely getting a series of grooves, not a smooth, clean, slicing cut, kind of like the grooves on a vinyl record. And it plagued me throughout the first, I think, 16 blanks. Never did get a handle on it. There you can see I was happy with that cut in general. It still had the grooves, but at least it was one complete pass, and a pretty clean result throughout beyond the first couple of inches. Wearing a glove on the left hand here, I mentioned in the last episode how the shavings had actually hurt my hand. Not like I had open sore from being sandblasted by it, but it just hurt. And so for at least a few blanks, I was wearing a glove on that hand. Obviously I've taken it off now. But boy, look at that armful of shavings I'm getting out of just one pass. That was a good feeling. Dope, but a bad finish. In case you didn't see it there, a chunk of wood came flying off. Turns out this blank had an oblique crack along the corner there, and the pressure of the gouge against that caused it to snap off. So I'll be taking that one out of the circulation. At some point I kept that one, and I may have another go at it. I think if I put it back between centers, I can probably flatten the end off, get down beyond that, and otherwise it looked like a good sound blank. So it may have a little life in it yet. So where was I? Just commenting on how nice it feels to be able to make a long, clean cut and get a lap full of shavings. Decent length and thickness, and not just little slivers and sawdust. So one of the other topics that we needed to clean up is the vertical tool angle for the long outside cut there. Somehow I was under the impression that it needed to have a pretty steep uphill angle. And so that's what I was presenting in the introduction, but I have since learned, in fact, I think in the course of recording the videos of this operation along the way, I learned that the correct angle is much flatter. And so anyway, when I was trying to do it with a steeper angle, the problem I was having was the handle would hit the rails as I tried to make the swing. And so I was kind of battling to keep the handle clear, and basically have my hand way down at the base end of the handle and slide it along the rails as I went. Well, you don't want that interference. But once I figured out, watching Stewart's videos, of course, that the proper angle is nearly flat, that problem went away. It was all a matter of mistaken impression of what the correct technique is. So, bottom line, keep your tool about as flat as you can in that horizontal dimension. Or is that the vertical dimension? I guess I'm keeping it horizontal in the vertical dimension. You may notice sometimes it looks like the tool rest moves. That's something that I paused or cut a section out of the video, so that was otherwise maybe imperceptible gap in the video where I stopped things to move the tool rest, and you didn't need to sit around and watch me doing that. Speaking of the tool rest, something that I learned, as just about everything else from Stuart, is that you want to be touching that tool rest about as little as possible. There are certain cuts where, particularly for getting started, you need to have the hand on there. We've already gone over some of those, that you need to have your thumb pressed against the tool rest to keep the tool from skidding. Beyond that, it's a tool rest, not a hand rest. And anytime your hand touches the tool rest during a cut like this, particularly a final finished cut, your hand is impeding the tool from moving smoothly. And it's kind of like, we were talking about the grooves and the vinyl record before. It's same kind of thing, You want this thing to glide smoothly, and anytime you touch something other than the tool touching the tool rest, that's introducing movement that is going to end up being conveyed into the wood, just like the needle that carves the groove in a vinyl record. It's noise, effectively. And so I used to routinely, in the small amount of turning I did, my hand would be rubbing against that tool rest the whole time. And actually I got blisters on a couple of occasions from rubbing it on there repeatedly over the course of a couple hours of turning. And you'll notice that now it rarely touches the tool rest. And in fact, for this cut, because at the end of the cut you have a fairly long extent of the tool over the tool rest. Here it's probably about 2.5, 3 inches. I'm actually holding fairly far back so that as I finish the cut, my hand doesn't end up running into the tool rest. Okay, zooming in here, and I think this time we actually get to see the grooves a bit. Yeah, right there. That was really irritating. It didn't bother me too much at this point, just because I'm going to be putting a tenon on the bottom there, and then at the end, last operation before calling this a finished bowl is to reshape the bottom, take off the tenon and reshape the bottom a little bit. So I knew this was going to be carved away at the end, but it was frustrating because I was not figuring it out and eliminating the problem. It just kept happening. And in a few minutes here, I'll reappear on screen and talk about how I basically solved the problem. But I don't want to spoil that, so we'll wait until we get to that point. This cut can be a little bit rough. I guess if you're really good at floating the bevel, it goes more smoothly, but oftentimes the blank here has voids because of the round chunk of wood that you cut it out of. And we're in the process generally by the end of, if not cutting the corner, then cutting the outside to shape. You're going to get rid of that and get down to solid wood. But for that angle cut, you're cutting across an area where there's wood in some places and void in others, and taking a fairly aggressive cut thickness-wise in the process. And that can be a pretty rough ride. I guess I still need to work on floating the bevel through there. But sometimes you'll see the tool getting bounced around a bit. Again, I attribute that in part to working with some fairly old dry oak and greener wood that I've been turning more recently, and some black walnut that has about 7 years on it since it was cut. It's a much more forgiving experience, not nearly as hard and difficult to work with as the old oak was. Since we were talking about the tool extending out over the tool rest a ways, let's talk a little bit about leverage. So one of the ways that you get a catch in turning, we've already talked about the main one, which is having a blade turned uphill into end grain. But another kind of catch is called a leverage catch. And the leverage here is basically how much tool you have hanging out over the tool rest. And the rule of thumb that I learned, I think, I might have heard it somewhere else as well, but definitely from Stuart, is that in general you want at least a 5-to-1 ratio of tool handle to the amount of tool extending over the tool rest. So for instance, if this comes in much more with hollowing out a bowl, the operation after next, than it does here, because here we have the tool rest angled with the outside shape of the bowl, whereas you don't do that. Some people do, but Stuart and I don't. Insert the tool rest inside the hollowed out bowl. So there, if you have a 6-inch deep bowl, you have 6 inches of tool extending beyond the tool rest. And in order to have good control of the tool, you want at least a 5-to-1 leverage, so that if you have 6 inches hanging over the tool rest, that means you need 6 times 5, 30 inches from the tool rest to the end of the handle. And this is a Stuart Batty interchangeable handle that I have here. I think this is a 24-inch handle. I have 3 different lengths, 9, 16, and 24, I think. Just about any time I'm using a bowl gouge, I have the longest one, the 24. There are longer ones, which I don't have. Yeah, that one turned out pretty well. Still some of the grooves at the bottom, only about maybe 3/4 of an inch there, but a pretty smooth, clean cut the rest of the way around. I think that was the best result yet. I'm going to interrupt the discussion of leverage here. This is the best angle we've had yet of the tool angle. And you can see I had it way down, about as low as I could get it, and still clear the rails, or the ways, I think is the more proper name for them. So anyway, that's what I was talking about as far as the tool angle and the wrong way that I was trying to do it, getting me into trouble. Back to the leverage issue. So right there, that's about as long as we get, is the finishing the cut towards what will be the lip of the bowl. And it's not too bad in this case. It's like 3 to 4 inches maybe at most. But the longer it's extended out there, the more leverage the lathe has on you. And that can result in, just because you don't have as much control, little things where the tool gets grabbed a little bit is made worse by the fact that the tool is extending out that far from the tool rest, so the grab gets accentuated. There's another kind of leverage-related catch that we'll talk about more. The place I've run into at least the most is with the bottom bowl gouge. So we'll return and talk about a different kind of leverage catch when we get there. I think that covers the mistakes that I made in the intro. There you can see the groove's pretty bad along the bottom. Yeah, right there. And that was bugging me. Let's see, have we talked about foot position? Not really. So, boy, we're going to get an overhead view here. But let's talk foot position for the main curved cut that we're doing here. In the intro, I don't know what I was thinking. I talk about how you step up to the tool and then step forward again, and that's wrong. So, hopefully we'll get to see it here. So once you have that positioned, what you want to do is figure out where you're going to finish that cut, and then step forward with the right foot to as far as you can, and you're not going to need to bring the tool any farther than that, so your body won't be in the way. And then you lean forward, not step forward, to get into the initial position to start the cut. Notice we're now into olive wood, and you know how much I like the olive better than the old oak. And I'm also getting better results with these pieces. So just to finish up on the discussion of stance, you need to start with your feet in a position where you're going to finish the cut, so that your body does not end up being in the way of finishing the cut. And then you can lean forward from there and still be in a solid, comfortable position to start the cut. And through the course of the cut, you're then transferring your weight from out on the toe of your right foot, front foot, where you're starting it. You're settling back into a more balanced position as you continue the cut, and weight transfer to the left or rear foot. And now I'm going to toss it back to myself on camera to talk about the grooves. Well, let's say that went way better than I had any reason to hope. I managed to get clean cuts with little, if any, torn grain. Apparently wasn't riding the bevel, so I didn't develop the bounce wave that I was so concerned about. The main problem I had, and I had this with all 14 of these blanks and every cut I made on all 14 of them, was the grooves that developed in the first inch or two of the cut. And that had me baffled. Obviously, it did it every time, so I never managed to figure out what was wrong with my technique that was causing that. I was that close to writing to Stuart to see if he could tell from looking at my videos what I was doing wrong. When looking at the videos myself, I think I figured out the problem. I noticed that the light coating of sawdust on the bed of the lathe behind the tool rest was dancing when I was going through the bad part of the cut. And looking farther down from the high view, I could see that the same thing was happening on the rubber mat at my feet. That's when it clicked. I think what was happening was that one leg of the lathe is sitting on a wooden platform, and that part isn't as stable, and as I was putting a certain type of stress or angle of stress into the lathe, that one leg was allowing the whole lathe to vibrate. It wasn't my tool that was vibrating, it was the lathe. So nothing I did with the tool was going to correct it. So I have another blank here. I'm going to throw that on the lathe. I might pull a few more out of the attic and start from scratch with those and be able to redo this cut, because I'm all out of prepared blanks here. And try a few more bowls and see if that solves the problem. I've basically just moved the lathe 6 inches so it's no longer sitting on that wooden platform, and check to see whether all 4 feet are solidly on the floor. I think they are. So here we go. Let's see if that little change is enough to correct this problem that I was having with every bloody bowl. Wish me luck. So this should be an interesting experiment. I'm not aware of any changes I made to my technique. The only change I'm conscious of anyway was moving the lathe that little bit so that all 4 feet are on concrete. And we should have a pretty good idea when it's all over whether that change alone was enough to get rid of that vibration. And I'm not sure how well I explained it in the intermission there, but my hypothesis is simply that because it could vibrate the foot on the bed, on the wooden platform that you can see in the upper right corner there, would allow that foot to vibrate, that when I was pushing just that first couple of inches before I made the turn, the force that I was imparting into the wood was across the width of the lathe, which of course is its weakest dimension. It's like 6 feet long and maybe 2 feet wide. So me pushing on the length, in the length of the in line with the bed, is not likely to introduce any vibrations. But right there, right when I'm cutting basically almost perpendicular to the bed, the theory or hypothesis is that was introducing a little bit of energy that resulted in a vibration. So we're a couple of blanks in now. I did end up taking 4 more blanks out of the attic where I store stuff, and so we're going to get to test this on 5 blanks altogether. And in this case, near the end, I'm going to zoom in so you can get a look at the bottom of this one. I'm still having some rough spot there. It really isn't quite the same kind of grooving result that I was getting initially. It's definitely poor tool control, and I'm having trouble getting a clean start and then kind of getting the initial curve around the corner there. And in fact, these last 2 passes, I'm just trying to kind of clean that up and then blend it in. And I'll tell you what, blending one cut into another, either starting here and trying to finish it and feather it out, or picking up in the middle of a face and trying to just blend that in is, well, it's well beyond my skill level, I'll tell you that. I don't know how advanced it is, but I sure haven't mastered it yet. So about the only chance I have to get a clean, smooth, rounded surface. Here we go. So you're still seeing some flaws there, but like I say, I don't think it's the same problem as before. They're not micro grooves like before. I think there might be a little bit of a bounce wave there, which again you've heard me talk about, but that would be from applying pressure with the thumb on the left hand, pushing the tool into the wood, which with this technique will create a bounce wave. That one's looking much better. I know that was a quick look at it. I'll give you a longer, in fact a slow motion look at the end of the last blank, or the bottom of the last blank in a minute or 2 here. This is a little longer than that because we're going to watch the whole last blank in real time. Speaking of changes to technique and the fact that I didn't make any consciously here, reviewing these last few blanks before I recorded this section of the voiceover, I found that I really hadn't improved on any of the problems that I called out at the beginning. My stance for both of the cuts is still wrong. I'm still too close to the lathe. I don't have a proper right foot forward position. It's forward, but not by as much as it should be. I'm still too close to the blank laterally. That is, I should be taking a half step to the right, and I actually pulled up one of his left hip is a good 10-12 inches, I'd say, from the end of the blank that he's working on. So he doesn't have this awkward angle, kind of cranking his left wrist back in order to start the cuts like this. And I've actually changed this in my turning since I recorded all of these videos. I will testify to the fact that it makes for a more comfortable experience and result. Also, we don't have a good angle like we did earlier, but I am still holding the handle too low for the big curved cut, about as low as I could, without running into the rails. So that's another thing that I hadn't figured out by the time I finished these. I'm no longer making that mistake, and it makes it makes for a much easier, I'm not having to think about, oh, do I have my hand too low? Because obviously I'm not looking over to the right at where my hand is. Alright, there goes the last corner. Get the tool rest partially into the angle there for the start, the first cut or two. Notice that I am taking a smaller bite to start with, where before I was going way too far to the right, towards the center of the bowl. Now I'm getting a comfortable amount on that first pass. And of course here is where it really starts to get thicker. You're not only running into where the first angle came out, but you're really starting to straighten it out to bring it around for the shape of the bowl. That is one thing that improved considerably over the course of these 21 blanks, is I think I got a decent basic profile for the bowls towards the end. Remember, some of the early ones were almost conical, and these are a much nicer bowl shape. A pretty decent shallow cut. I'm finding that the shallow cuts are actually a bit harder to pull off without having the tool come off the groove and basically straightening out, not continuing the curve. That the deeper you go, kind of the easier it is to maintain, not necessarily the line you wanted, but a consistent line. Partly because the bevel is deep into a cut where it can't just bounce or slide out. I think I mentioned in the last episode that I've turned a few bowls with green wood, that is wood that was recently cut and is very wet, and man, that stuff goes like butter. I mean, there's problems that come with working with green wood as far as the wood moving after the fact and it's not staying around, and if you don't finish the bowl the same day that you start it, you're likely to have to do a lot of rework on day 2 because the bowl's way out of round already. But just as far as the ease of cutting through it, it's a completely different experience than well-seasoned or poorly seasoned, very dry wood. Let's see how that's looking. Not too bad, kind of hard to see from here, but let's take one more pass at it. One of the reasons I was doing shallow passes on some of these at the end is if you get too aggressive, every aggressive pass you make is making your blank smaller. So if you were looking forward to a chunk of wood that looks like, I can get a 10-inch bowl out of here, and you make a few aggressive passes, all of a sudden you're down to 8.5 inches. So when I thought I already had a decent shape and had gotten through all the bark down to good wood, sometimes I'm trying to minimize how much wood I'm taking off. Like here, that's a pretty thin slice I'm trying to make, and my skill level just isn't quite there to be able to handle the tool and make that shallow a cut all the way around. I'll get there. All right, there you go. That's blank number 21, and apart from having a shard come flying off of one of them, no great excitement. Sorry about that. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.